Excellent committee. Thank you for being here on this fine Thursday afternoon. I'd like to recognize Chairman Patton is joining us today. We have the distinct pleasure of trying to put some bills together and see if we can't get them across over to the Senate side. Things have been a little bit different there this year, and so we're not sure what bills to expect or not to expect. So we're going to see if we can't put a few things together and move some of the things that we've already moved across the House floor, and I believe there's one that we'll talk about that we've heard in Judiciary as well. So with that, let's start out with the approval of minutes for March 16th. Everybody should have received those. Is there any questions or clarifications on that? Seeing none, do I have a motion as it relates to the minutes for March 16th? Representative Chairman Patton.
I think everything was perfect in the minutes. As such, I move approval.
Oh, fantastic. All right, Representative Slingensieben has the second on that. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. All right, got that taken care of. We're going to go ahead and move into final action and start with Senate Bill 174. Natalie, would you like to give us an overview of 174?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senate Bill 174 increases the criminal penalties for the crime of interference with law enforcement when that violation involves fleeing from a law enforcement officer.
Very good. Committee, is there questions as it relates to Senate Bill 174 for Natalie? Seeing none, are there amendments or discussion as it relates to 174? Seeing none, committee, I would like for Natalie to brief us on Senate Bill 73 now, because I intend to make a motion to have the contents of Senate Bill 73 merged into Senate Bill 174. So Natalie, would you share us what Senate Bill 73 is?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senate Bill 73 adds domestic battery and violations of a protection order to the crimes that a person can have the intent to commit when they are committing burglary or aggravated burglary.
Very good. Committee, are there any questions or amendments as it relates to Senate Bill 73? Seeing none, I would make the motion that we move the contents of Senate Bill 73 into the contents of Senate Bill 174. And I move that motion. Do I have a second? Representative Thompson seconds. Committee, any discussion? Representative Heiberger.
I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I guess given that I have some concerns about SB 174, it's going to put me in a difficult position. But
I understand. I think where we are at this point in the session puts us all in a bit of a difficult situation when it comes to getting everything moved that we want to, but your concern is recognized. Further discussion, committee. All right, I close on my motion. All in favor of putting the contents of Senate Bill 73 into Senate Bill 174, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. No. We ayes have it. Wish to be recognized as a no. Senator or Representative Heiberger.
What have I done to you, Mr. Chair?
All right, so we have done that. Now, let's move to, so we've got Senate Bill 73. I'm now going to ask Natalie to talk about House Bill 2023. Would you give us a refresher on House Bill 2023, Natalie?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2023 creates the crime of interference with the conduct of a healthcare facility. It provides criminal penalties for violating that crime, and it also increases the criminal penalties for battery of a healthcare provider. I would note that this one did go through the House Committee on Judiciary, so some of you may not remember the actual hearing, but you did pass it out across the floor, so it's over in the Senate right now.
Yeah, thank you, Natalie. Yeah, it passed the House 118-4. If you guys will recall. So I would like to move to have the contents of that bill, House Bill 2023, added to the contents of Senate Bill 174, and I move that motion. Do I have a second? Representative Turk. Committee discussion on that request. Seeing none, I close on my motion. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Ayes have it. 2023, the contents thereof are added to Senate Bill 174. All right, we have 2 more to add to create this beautiful little crime bundle we're working on. 2398, Natalie, would you share with us what that bill is?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2398 adds the placing of controlled substances into pills into the definition of what manufacturing a controlled substance is. It also increases the criminal penalties for manufacturing fentanyl, and it creates a special sentencing rule to make sentences for distributing fentanyl presumptive imprisonment.
Very good. So this bill passed, if you guys will recall, 121 to nothing on the House side. So just for your perspective. So I make a motion that we add the contents of Senate Bill 20, or House Bill 2398 into Senate Bill 174. Yep. Go ahead. Okay, so the House committee version as amended, that did go across the floor and passed 121 to 0. So those contents added into the Senate Bill 174 crime bundle. And I move that motion. Do I have a second? Representative Eric Smith seconds. Committee discussion on this. Representative Heiberger.
This may not be necessary, but since the time we voted on that bill, I found that a young man I used to babysit when he was 4, 5, and 6 was found dead in the park, and it was fentanyl.
I read that article and it absolutely broke my heart and reinvigorated my desire to make sure that we get this through. This is a bill that the Senate has, Senate Judiciary either did not have time to work or opted not to. And I think it's a very important piece of legislation that we move this year, thus wanting to put it as part of this. Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think all of us are in agreement that we've got to do something about the proliferation of fentanyl. And I'm not at all sure that this enhanced penalty bill is really going to make all that much difference, but it's a stab at the problem. But this was all, at least in my mind, part of a overall plan to not only increase penalties for those who manufacture and distribute fentanyl, but also to legalize the test strips, which citizens can use, innocent citizens can use. People are not drug abusers can use to detect the presence of fentanyl in various products. But I think I heard somewhere that the test strips have all been pulled out by the Senate and that we don't have a bill now pending anywhere to legalize the test strips. Does anyone know if that's the case?
That is not correct. So let me tell you where that's
Educate me, because
Absolutely.
that's part of why we're here.
Certainly. So we have 2 bills, if you'll recall, that came out of the House, went across the floor as it comes to legalizing the fentanyl test strips. And then our bill actually included the test strips for the date rape drugs in drinks at bars and things like that. So our bill passed unanimously across the floor and is currently sitting in the Senate. Makes it unheard, unmoved on, inaction. So it is sitting there in a viable bill. The sister bill that ran through House Health Committee went to Senate Health Committee. The Senate Health Committee really felt that that was a criminal matter, and so they used that shell for something else and gutted that fentanyl test strip bill, replaced it with the contents of something else, and will be running it across their floor. So our bill is still alive and well, having passed our chamber 121 to 0, but the Senate Judiciary has not taken any action on that legislation. Thus, my desire to put it in this Senate bill, send it over to get it into conference.
So does what you're putting into, or suggesting that we put into 174, include the legalization?
Absolutely.
Of test
Yep,
strips?
2021 as passed by this committee and the House floor does include that. And it passed unanimously, I will reiterate.
I recall well, and so that will undoubtedly make it a high priority for us when we go to conference and elsewhere. And I apologize, I must have missed that in the bill brief.
It's all right. That's why we're here. We want to clarify. So we have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, I close on my motion. All those in favor of adding House Bill 20, oh, hold on a second, let me get it right. House Bill 2398 as passed by this committee and passed by the House into the Senate Bill 174 crime bundle, say aye. Opposed, no. All right, the ayes have it. We've got that added. Last one, committee, is Senate Bill 244. And Senate Bill 244 is a bill that we heard that passed final action in the Senate, 35-3, was then referred to the Committee on Judiciary. And I will let Chairman Patton speak about that here in just a second. But if we could ask Natalie to give us an overview of Senate Bill 244, I would appreciate it.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senate Bill 244 authorizes the Attorney General to prosecute any crime that's part of an alleged course of criminal conduct that occurred in 2 or more counties.
Very good. Chairman Patton, would you enlighten us on the action of your committee, please?
Yeah, so we actually heard this bill on Monday. We had proponents, Senator Clays, Eric Stafford from the chamber, and then written proponents from the Attorney General and the from Home Depot. No opponents, no neutral. We heard the bill. After we heard it, I think there was generally, the committee was in favor of doing something. I'm not sure they agreed with the exact language, and we may have that discussion here shortly. When I heard that you guys were creating some crime bundles, I thought this would be a great place to put this content, because I really needed a Senate shell to drop in a corporate reform bill that we have coming through that no opposition. In fact, the committee already passed that bill out as a House bill, but I didn't think we'd have time to get it through both chambers and to become law. It's a rather lengthy corporate bill, and if we could accomplish it this year and not have to hear it again next year, I wanted to take advantage of that. So we used Senate Bill 244 to insert that corporate reform bill in hopes that you all would put the contents of 244 into your crime bill.
Thank you, Chairman Patton. So I'm going to go ahead and make the motion that we add the contents of Senate Bill 244 that was referred to Committee of the Judiciary that had passed the Senate to our Senate Bill 174 crime bill. And I have a second from Representative Eric Smith. Discussion committee on Senate Bill 244. Representative Heiberger.
Yeah, just a question. So our corporate bill that passed the House, no?
It has not passed the House.
Okay,
We
all right.
passed it out. The House bill we didn't pass out of committee until late last week.
Gotcha.
It came to us late. It took, there was, as you recall, quite a few changes, and so the revisers, it took them a long time to make sure we got it right, and so we didn't hear it until well after turnaround.
Sure, and there's nothing conferenceable with comparable subject matter. Okay. All right.
I don't believe so.
All 146 pages, if I recall. We were going to have Natalie read that one to us, but opted not to. You'll waive the reading. Very good. Good choice. Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, and I may need to be a little bit more verbose because there are some members of this committee that did not have an opportunity to hear the testimony in House Judiciary. I'll try to summarize it in a sense, and I'm sure others may have heard a few things differently, and I hope they'll straighten me out, particularly my chairman, who has a much better recollection than I. But the proponents of this bill were J.R. Clays. He is a senator who offered the bill in the Senate on behalf of the Attorney General, for whom he also works. The next proponent was Eric Stafford of the Kansas Chamber of Commerce. We then had written testimony, as I think was indicated before, from Home Depot. And it seems like we had one other piece of written testimony. What was that? Yeah, the Attorney General, actually, Chris Kobach, did submit written testimony but sent no representative to the committee for questioning other than Senator Clays in his capacity as the person who introduced the bill. And we were told in the Attorney General's testimony, well, as a general principle, the concept was that there are organized crime rings that are running around throughout the country, and they are stealing property from big box stores like Home Depot, and then they're transporting it across the county line into another county where they're managing to sell it. And the contention was that local law enforcement and local prosecutors are ignoring these crimes, that they're not doing anything about them. Now, Representative Mon was good enough to do prompt research on the scene, and he was able to locate the Kansas statute, which says if a criminal activity occurs in more than one county, that the prosecutor from either county has the authority to prosecute that crime, even though it wasn't all in his or her home county. I think there's also a venue statute, and maybe Representative Ma might be able to correct me if I'm wrong, but once again, in one of these multi-county criminal enterprises allows venue to lie in any county where the act occurred. So then we looked at, well, what is the justification? Is this really happening? The Attorney General's office cited to an industry, quote, study of some type that Vice Chairman Schreiber located online, and the Attorney General told us that Kansas was in the top 10 for this type of a crime, because apparently nothing was being done. As I recollect, the Vice Chair's research found that wasn't the case, that the study also actually put Kansas in the middle of the pack, so to speak. I don't have a lot of faith, honestly, in that study. No, one can look at crime statistics and get a lot of information from KBI and elsewhere about the natures of crimes. That wasn't offered, it was an industry study. What's most concerning about the nature of the testimony was that we had no testimony from law enforcement saying this was a problem. We did not hear anybody from the KBI saying that there are organized crime rings proliferating in Kansas that are engaging in this type of theft. We didn't hear from the County and District Attorneys Association, which we always hear from on these types of issues, particularly issues which involve not only a rampant crime spree, but also involve assigning prosecutorial authority to the Attorney General, wherein traditionally and for 150 years in this case, with the exception of a few things like election crimes, which the same Attorney General, when he was Secretary of State, got prosecutorial authority for, securities crimes. There are some other crimes where the Attorney General has original jurisdiction, but as a general proposition in Kansas, local control, local voters elect their prosecutor. And that prosecutor, when he or she needs assistance, can then invite the Attorney General to assist in the prosecution. But in some prominent cases, we have had circumstances where Attorney General Klein, for example, arrived in Sedgwick County and commenced prosecutions without the consent or the knowledge or the invitation of the local prosecutor. And those prosecutions were eventually dismissed based on the doctrine that the Attorney General only gets involved in prosecuting these crimes upon the invitation of the local prosecutor who has been elected by the people who are closest to that jurisdiction. Another exception to that rule is, of course, if there's an allegation of malfeasance on the part of an elected official, the sheriff, for example, county commissioners, we also give the Attorney General original jurisdiction. So the difficulty became that we had a bill presented to us based on very questionable evidence regarding the nature of the problem, or whether there even is a problem. In fact, Mr. Stafford candidly testified on behalf of the chamber that he wasn't aware of any instance. But Home Depot and others wanted the chamber to be behind this, and they were happy to support their members. We had a bill where prosecutors weren't asking for it. We had a bill where law enforcement wasn't asking for it. And ultimately, 2 of the 3 witnesses, actually the live witnesses, Mr. Stafford, but it amounted to J.R. Clay's, the Attorney General, Mr. Stafford, and a letter from Home Depot. I think it is glaring when you don't see the Kansas County and District Attorneys Association stand up in support of a bill like this. I guess it must be a problem that either they're not aware of, or that doesn't exist, or that maybe the Attorney General didn't bother to even consult with them about before he prepared his bill, because they weren't there. The same is true of Kansas law enforcement. Makes the whole thing very questionable. So we then have to look at what do we do with the situation? Because if in fact there are organized crime rings operating in Kansas on a multi-county basis that are stealing hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars of property from big box stores and selling them in other counties, we need to stop that. And so after conferring with at least some of my colleagues on this committee, and certainly letting my chairman know and Chairman Owens as well know, I did ask the reviser to prepare a balloon amendment to 244, and I would like to, well, first have the amendment distributed, and then once somebody's seen it, we'll see if anybody will join me in seconding that motion. And if you'd like for me to explain while it is being distributed, I'd be happy to, or we can wait, as you prefer, Mr. Chair.
No, it's perfectly fine. If you would like to discuss your amendment, that'd be great.
Okay. The amendment is comparatively simple. Conceptually, what it does is it limits this original jurisdiction, if you will, of the Attorney General to crimes involving theft, both misdemeanor and felony theft, as well as violation of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. And by the way, that act is actually broader than theft, but it was specifically mentioned, I believe, by Senator Clays as something, a theory of prosecution that they wanted to look at being able to use. So what this does is this would give us, this would give, excuse me, the Attorney General the power to prosecute the multi-county crimes which brought J.R. Clays on his behalf to the committee. It would also be a little bit broader, quite a bit broader, because it would allow original jurisdiction on RICO cases, multi-county. But it would not allow the Attorney General on his or own initiative to instigate a prosecution based on multi-county crimes of any kind or any type, because we have statutes to deal with that, and our prosecutors deal with it every day. I better stop at this point, because I think it's been distributed. I would like to move my balloon amendment, and we'll see if there's a second, and then I can wind up pretty quick.
All right, so we have the movement by Representative Carmichael, second by Representative Schlingensieben.
Very quickly then, to finish up before we get anywhere else, the attempt is to satisfy the evidence that was presented to us without throwing out 150 years of Kansas law about local control and the exclusive jurisdiction, if you will, of local prosecutors in these cases.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and take this as a substitute motion because I have already moved and seconded adding it adding it in. So Natalie's correcting me. So you're a substitute motion.
I amend my motion to reflect it as a substitute, and I appreciate the reviser's assistance if the seconder consents.
Very good. Thank you very much.
We'll need the seconder's consent.
Yeah, and he's good with that. Committee, discussion on the amendment. Representative Eric Smith.
So one of the things that I brought up the other day in committee, as an example, it seemed like we focused, well, we did. We focused on organized retail crime on this for the purpose of being an example of what he or the Attorney General at the time will be able to have concurrent jurisdiction over. If we look at, I'll tell you that I was part of a task force back in 2000, around the year 2000, under Attorney General Carlos Stovall, given statewide jurisdiction, but the purpose was that we had several counties that were on the task force. And so we would do criminal interdiction on various roads, highways, drug investigations in all of these rural counties so that we could share resources. And that really worked out well for us to have that with the Attorney General. And then the idea being that the Attorney General's office would assist. But it did muck the water a bit because then you're, to put it short, if you have a concurrent jurisdiction, the Attorney General doesn't have to maneuver what county we're going to do this under. It's whatever county takes it on, the Attorney General decides to assist in that prosecution or not. And I think that it becomes a more viable tool. And I say all of that with the idea that your amendment only points at theft. And I suppose theft would cover probably 90% of the situations that we run into as far as organized crime because the whole purpose that this organized crime entity is committing these acts is to make money. Oftentimes that's theft, but sometimes it can be drugs, sometimes it can be human trafficking. It could be any number of things that cross county boundaries. So I'm going to be against this amendment and for the addition into the bill. But I understand what the representative is trying to get at here and making sure that we don't give too much authority in jurisdiction away. I can't see that the Attorney General is going to have the resources to take over every one of these circumstances when they occur. The example I gave the other day was on catalytic converters. We had a ring come out of Shawnee County down into our little old district, and they did a whopper of a job on several tow truck companies and salvage yards, et cetera, parking lots taking catalytic converters, but they operate in the counties surrounding us, our county, and then come back here, and this is where they split up the goods. So that's just another example. Thank you.
Further discussion, committee. Representative Heiberger.
I'm going to be supportive of the amendment. I think the discussion that we had in committee indicated that there were tools for district attorneys to prosecute these cases. I wasn't clear that the third Attorney General had the resources to pursue even the limited version that we're looking at here under the current circumstances. Now, I think all the testimony we heard, I mean, we did hear from Representative Smith about catalytic converters, but all the testimony we heard on in the committee was about theft. I think it's just too broad of a blanket authority given to the Attorney General. It's really in contrast with, as the representative said, 150 years of our history, and I'm going to be voting no.
Additional question, committee. Representative Carmichael, you might close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I recognize the concern that Representative Smith expresses. And there are circumstances where we have authorized original jurisdiction for the Attorney General. And I can think of at least 2 specific areas since I've been here where we've done that. We've never done that without serious hearings on what we're doing. How far are we going to expand the authority of the Attorney General? And, you know, if we want to talk about multi-county drug task forces, we ought to have prosecutors in here, and they ought to talk about the value of it and whether or not they want the Attorney General to have the authority to come and commence prosecutions in their county without their knowledge or without their consent, or maybe even contrary to their desires. But we didn't have any of that testimony. And I know we talked about catalytic converters. Catalytic converter, we offered a catalytic converter law, but stealing a catalytic converter is theft, so it would still be covered under the amendment that I propose. But I think before we go down this road of giving giving an Attorney General blanket statewide original jurisdiction over multi-county crimes, we need to hear more evidence than what we've heard thus far in the Judiciary Committee. And with respect to my good friends on the Corrections Committee, you haven't heard any of the evidence. This is a big step. This is a major step. Now, I'm going to reach out and touch the third rail as I close. I'll tell you what I think this is really about. I think it's about the Attorney General wants to prosecute Planned Parenthood for using telemedicine to prescribe medication-based abortions. And in its present form, it would give the Attorney General that original jurisdiction. We have a statute that purports to outlaw that practice, which is presently enjoined by the courts on an interim or temporary basis. I think there's a lot more going on here than what was presented to us. My preference would be to trust our county prosecutors and not give the Attorney General any original jurisdiction until we hear from them. But in the interest to try to reach some sort of an accommodation, this amendment allows the Attorney General original jurisdiction to deal with the specific circumstances that caused the senator to introduce the bill, and that deals with all of the circumstances that the proponents testified about. And so this is middle ground. Without this amendment, obviously, I won't support it. I also want to be clear, I'm having serious reservations about bundling all of these bills, but we'll take that up whenever we get through this process. So with that, Mr. Chair, I close and move my substitute motion to amend.
All in favor of the Carmichael substitute amendment, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. No. Division has been called. All in favor of the Carmichael amendment, say aye. Oh, raise your hand. Yeah, sorry. My apologies. All right, 4 and opposed, raise your hand. All right, the remainder are no. So,
would you please record my affirmative vote on my own substitute motion?
all right, very good. And record Schlingensiepel, Heiberger, and Martinez. So we're back on the original motion of adding 244 into the 174 crime bundle. I just wanted to add a couple of my own thoughts as I listened to the representative and his perspective. There was absolutely nothing that kept the County and District Courts Association from chiming in on this. While they may have chosen not to, I guarantee you they were full aware of this legislation as it passed through the Senate and passed across the floor by a strong bipartisan measure, I might add. They were aware of it when it was heard in the House Judiciary. They, law enforcement, and any other organization, as everybody knows, has the full right to come in here to provide testimony, to speak or to not speak, and to share their opinions on this. I would argue that if they chose not to, then they're agnostic on this being passed. I think that if they were opposed to it, if they had an issue with it, they would have shared that with us because they have many, many times in the past. We can look at the representatives of those organizations and see them in the room on a regular basis. And so it's apparent to me that they chose not to, not because they weren't provided the opportunity, but they simply chose not to. And therefore, as this bill worked its way through the House and the Senate, there was no opposition testimony provided whatsoever from anyone. There was no neutral testimony provided from anyone. There was simply proponent testimony provided by a number of different organizations and sources. And so I think that, in my opinion, that speaks volumes as it relates to this bill and where it needs to go. And so we'll go ahead and go to further discussion on this before we move forward. Is there further discussion on the motion? On my motion to add it to the crime bundle. Yep, go right ahead.
I respectfully disagree with my friend the chair. Been here 10 years. Never seen a situation where on an important jurisdictional bill like this, we didn't hear from the County and District Attorneys Association. Never. Now, is that because they're asleep at the switch? Is that because they support the legislation, but they're just too lazy to come over here? Or is it maybe because they don't want to cross Chris Kobach? And so that's why they're not here. The chairman and I can speculate all day on that topic, but I do believe the county and district attorneys, as well as Kansas law enforcement, have done the legislature a disservice by not testifying on this bill in either the House or the Senate. I'm disappointed. Thank you.
Noted. Further discussion. Representative Mon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not, this may be out of order, and I'll let you decide, but I do note that Mr. Klump, who represents many of the law enforcement agencies, is in the room, and I will leave it up to the chair whether we can invite Mr. Klump to give his opinion if he wishes.
It is standard operating kind of procedure within the committee that when we're working bills, we don't allow anybody to testify specifically on those. So we'll go ahead and stick with our tip area there. This will ultimately be put in conference, right? That's what we're doing, is creating a conference bundle. And so changes could theoretically be made in conference if they wish to be spoken. But knowing that he is here every day in both committees, I would assume that if they had a position or wanted to share that position publicly, that they would have done so. Thank you. Further questions, committee? All right, seeing none. On my motion, I close. All in favor of adding the contents of Senate Bill 244 to the Senate Bill 174 bundle, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Those wishing to be recorded, noes, Schlingensieben, Heiberger, Martinez, and Carmichael. All right, committee, we are done putting everything into Senate Bill 174. So I'm going to make a motion. Yep, go right ahead.
Could I just request a list of the bills that are bundled into this bundle now?
Be happy to. So Senate Bill 174 now contains the contents of Senate Bill 73, House Bill 2023, House Bill 2398, and Senate Bill 244. All right. I'm going to go ahead and make the motion that we pass Senate Bill 1. Oh, sorry, Representative Resman, my apologies.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you explain that, what happens to these bills, where they go from here?
Yeah, I would be happy to. So now we have all the contents wrapped up into one Senate bill. Since this Senate bill has passed the Senate already, it will go back to the House again for another vote. Some of those items we've already passed through the House, some of them we haven't. The lack of understanding of what the intentions of the Senate are in moving a number of the bills that we have already passed is kind of what's led to this pre-bundling approach, just to ensure that those that we have moved already have the ability to get back over there and get put in a conference committee report. So we will take Senate Bill 174 back to the floor, where I will carry it. I will explain what we've done, why we've done it. We'll have the ability to debate it and then ultimately vote on it to send it back to the Senate, who will then have the option to concur or non-concur. My assumption is that they will non-concur, and it will go to conference for further discussion. Yep, Representative Schlingensieben.
So what happens to the rookie question here? So
Oh, that's good.
What happens to the bills we just emptied?
So some of them will sit there and just die, if you will. The next motion I have is actually add some contents to Senate Bill 73 when we get to that point.
Okay.
And so, but some of the other ones, like Senate Bill 244, was already used yesterday. The other House bills will likely just sit there and they'll keep the contents because we're just taking the contents, the verbiage out,
Right.
and we're adding it to this. So that bill still exists, just probably won't go anywhere. Further questions procedurally? Yep, Representative Carmichael.
And I think those shells, if you will rise from the dead next session and be available for further shenanigans?
Well, I wouldn't say that they're shenanigans. I would say that we're being very clear and very transparent here in exactly what we're trying to accomplish. That, as anybody knows, that is the way that I like to operate, in full transparency. But I also like to get things done. And that's what I want to make sure happen. This committee has done a tremendous amount of hard work this year. You guys have learned a lot in very short order, and we have done a lot across the House floor. The Senate has had some different priorities. They've taken different positions on a number of things, and I think due to some serious time constraints, we're simply not sure which of these they will be able to take up. So certainly being transparent in the process, but want to make sure that the good work of this committee makes it through as well. Further discussion or questions, committee? Representative Heiberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm generally supportive of what we're doing here today. I mean, it's unfortunate that the Senate Judiciary Committee isn't doing its job in putting us in this position. So given that, I was willing to support this. I would note that there are now, given what we've bundled into the things that we bundled previously, there are now 6 bills in this package. But we've bundled at least one bill too far for my taste, and I'll be voting no.
Understood. Thank you. Further questions or comments, committee? All right, I'm going to make the motion that we pass out favorably Senate Bill 174 as amended. Do I have a second? Second, Representative Thompson. Further discussion, committee? Representative Carmichael.
Mr. Chairman, I apologize. Shenanigans was the wrong word. I couldn't come up with the right word. I still haven't found the right word, but I understand why you're doing this, and it's the Senate's fault, not this committee or the committee leadership's fault.
Needs to be a song about shenanigans, I think, at some point. They call me. No. All right, committee, any further discussion? Now that was impressive. I didn't even say, hey, Google or Alexa or anything. Pretty good right there. All right, committee. We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Opposed, no. Those ayes have it. Those wishing to be recorded, Representative Heiberger as a no, Representative Carmichael as a no. Okay, committee, last item of business, Senate Bill 73. As we know, those contents have been added to Senate Bill 174. It is my desire to take the contents of House Bill 2021 and add the contents of that bill into Senate Bill 73. Natalie, would you care to share with us what House Bill 2021 was?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2021 allows the evidence-based program account money to be used on certain children who are identified as exhibiting potentially offending behavior during the course of a child in need of care proceeding. It also requires the Department of Corrections to build data systems, and it allows overall case length extensions for certain juvenile offenders. It also allows for detention sanctions for violations of probation.
Thank you, Natalie. Committee questions for Natalie? So this is the bill, if you'll recall, we spent an extensive amount of time debating. It did pass the House floor 85-36, where it has sat in the Senate Judiciary Committee. I do know that there are some conversations ongoing. The goal will ultimately be, of course, we'll pass this back across the floor as it is. It'll end up in conference where there could be some changes and alternatives to this, where you would then have the option, of course, to vote again in each chamber. I know the Senate has been working diligently on some compromises with some of their members that have concerns over there, which is kind of what's led to it not actually moving out of the Senate Judiciary Committee due to some concerns. And so it is my sincere hope that we're able to find some good compromises on this language with the Senate and ultimately get it through. But this process would allow it to be put into conference for that to occur. Representative Schlingensieben.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if Is this part of the response to kind of, to 367 in a sense, that we were trying to use some of that, I can't remember if it was in the 40s or 60 million, somewhere in that area, to be able to access and create juvenile crisis intervention centers?
So this one doesn't specifically address the juvenile crisis intervention centers. We had another bill that did with the terminology within that. But this one is an attempt to right some of the issues with 367, not only on the access to funding before juveniles get into the system, being able to have them evaluated, being able to have them receive some treatment hopefully before they get, but it's also an attempt to fix the issue that we heard more about yesterday in our joint committee, where we were very clearly told that there are some concerns. I will say clearly. She actually wasn't super clear that it was 367, although she referred to it once, but that the juvenile justice system and some of those effects are what are leading to children being taken out of their homes because of those behavioral issues, not neglect, not abuse, but behavioral. And this is one of a number of steps in hopes to turn that around. Representative Heiberger.
Again, we've got multiple issues going on in the same bill. I certainly support parts of it, but there are parts that increase detention limits and case limits for youth involved in the justice system. And we were very clear in the 367 process and in the hearing on this bill, all the data strongly suggests that, or indicates that that detention increases bad outcomes for the youth who are involved. And that's why I will be opposing it again.
Understood. Committee, further questions? Representative Carmichael.
While I agree with my good friend and colleague, the ranking member, and I certainly agree that the evidence is abundantly clear that increasing detention times for juveniles is actually counterproductive because it allows them to meet other more experienced and professional juvenile criminals and learn from their peers. On the other hand, the opportunity to free up some of this money for earlier intervention is a countervailing factor. It's sad we have these in the same bill because you have to make the Hobson's choice, or it's between the devil and the deep blue sea, I guess. And I'm going to end up on the different side than my friend, the ranking member, because I want to get the programs going and the money spent, because I'm afraid if we don't, it's going to get used for more incarceration or something else undesirable. Thank you.
Thank you. And yes, to be clear, this was two separate bills last year that I put together, but this has started out as one bill this year, just so we're clear on that. Representative Heiberger.
Yes, in response to my learned colleague from Wichita, my understanding that the law currently has as good a language as we can do to put those funds in a strong lockbox for only evidence-based programs.
Representative Carmichael.
A lockbox is only as strong as the legislature that passed it. The next legislature could issue a new set of keys. Thank you.
Very true. All right, committee, I'm going to go ahead and move my motion to add the contents of House Bill 2021. Oh, go ahead. This is why we have Natalie here. So my motion is to gut the contents of Senate Bill 73, to then add the contents of House Bill 2021, which would then create the House substitute for Senate Bill 73. Did I get that right? Okay, very good. And I move that. Do I have a second? Representative Turk is my second. Committee, further discussion? Seeing none, I close and move my motion. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. No. The ayes have it. Those wishing to be recorded, Heiberger as a no and Carmichael as an aye. And Schlingensiepel as an aye as well, and Martinez as an aye as well. All right, committee, was there anything else? Because I sure don't have it written down. Well, we want to take a minute here, since we're done working our bills. This is going to be what I believe is our last committee meeting. We might have one brief meeting at the rail just for minutes from this meeting, but otherwise, this will be the last time that we meet this session. I really want to take a moment to just give my sincere appreciation to everybody on this committee. You know, there are a lot of new folks that have been asked to learn a tremendous amount of information in a very short period of time. And we've been able to really move some legislation out of here. We obviously didn't get it all across the floor like we wanted to, but I appreciate your guys' efforts in making that happen. I also want to send a special thanks to our staff, because we have well, not arguably, we do have the best staff in the building. I have no doubt about that. While Representative Patton might argue with me, we share some of that staff, which makes them doubly great. So very thankful for them, and a special shout out to Jante. Jante was supposed to be here today, but it was going to be her last day. She's taken another position. And so just really wanted to send out our appreciation for her work as well. So committee, thank you very much. Chairman Patton, thank you for joining us today. And we will be adjourned. Thank you.